Thank you for joining us. My name is Nikki Lefebvre, and I am the director of Natick Historical Society. We are an independent nonprofit that was founded in 1880, and we thrive on the support of community members like you. And thanks to the generosity of our local community, we are able to offer many wonderful programs for free to everyone who's interested. So thank you to our supporters. This particular program is a really exciting collaboration between Natick Historical Society, Natick Pegasus, and Joe Weisse. And the series is called Natick Remembers. And our goal is really to capture stories about Natick's recent past. So we've invited people who have lived or worked in Natick and had an impact on the community to sit down with Joe Weisse and have a conversation. All the conversations will be filmed by Natick Pegasus and archived at Natick Historical Society. Members of the public are invited to join us for these conversations and stay for a Q&A with our invited guests. All the conversations take place at the Natick History Museum on 58 Elliott Street in South Natick. And it's one of many programs that we offer to the community. So if you are interested in learning more about the Natick Remembers series or about any of our other programs and activities, please visit www.natickhistoricalsociety.org. And before the program begins, I want to thank again Joe Weisse, Natick Pegasus, all of our supporters at Natick Historical Society, and our invited guests. Enjoy the program.
Nikki, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And also to Abby and the board and all who are involved. And thanks to all of you for coming out today. And great to see you here. Many friends and colleagues of John and so forth as well. Thanks to Randy Brewer and Jeff Valetti and Chris from Pegasus who are here to record this. And we're delighted to have John H. Garabedian, who currently owns 4 radio stations on the Cape. He started and was the host of a nationally syndicated radio program. He started Channel 66, V66 back in the 80s, which was a video music VJ type of format, which was the first, I think, local of that kind to in the country. And of course, John owned a station on the Nantucket Island, as well as, of course, for what we're here to talk about, WGTR 1060 AM here in Natick. And everyone has such great fond memories of the station, and we do thank you, John, for putting that together, your service here in Natick, and we're delighted to have you at this museum.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a story I've never told in a forum like this, or maybe at a cocktail party or late some night. Joe asked me to start at the beginning, and I thought as I was putting this together, it's about a radio station, which is a part of Natick's history. And unfortunately, every time I go find pictures and things to show, they're all pictures of me. And so this is not the story of my life, and I'm trying to keep it that way, but it kind of gets back that way, so don't think I'm some wild egomaniac, even though I probably drift that direction. So let's go back to when this all started. Joe wanted me to start with a personal thing. When did the moment happen when I wanted to choose radio as a career? This is a survey from WORC in Worcester, which was the top 40 station that owned central Massachusetts all through the 50s and 60s. That's probably 1956. Elvis Presley has the top 4 songs. He actually, if you take out the Chordettes, he has the top 6 songs, or top 5 of the top 6 songs. And those are all big smash hits. That was an era when music was changing. And I was a student at Weston High School. We had moved from Belmont when I was 12 or 13 years old. And I remember walking into school from the school bus one spring morning. It was probably 1956 or so. And one of the kids yelled, "Hey, Arnie Ginsberg mentioned Weston High School on his radio show last night." And I went, Arnie Ginsberg? How do you have a disc jockey named Arnie Ginsberg? Because everybody had these white Anglo-Saxon Protestant names, Bill Roberts and, Jim Jones. I mean, very, or Alan Derry, Dave Maynard. But that's how it all started. It ended up, I was always interested in radio and television. I started actually as the first TV generation in the late 40s. I'm older than I look. And I graduated to radio because when we moved to Weston, a friend of mine who lived down the street his father had this rock garden. He was always doing the rock garden, and he had this radio out there which was always on, and it had Top 40 on it, and Don't Be Cruel, and all those songs were the ones that were playing, which got me into rock and roll and pop music, and I fell in love with it. And to me, popular music, contemporary popular music, was a connection, an emotional, psychological, actual connection with the culture of what's going on right now. And I still feel that way. I mean, not to offend anybody's musical taste, I own a classic rock station, I own an 80s station, I own an easy, nice and easy, like Magic station. And they're wonderful, and they're very successful, and they have huge audiences. However, to me, that's like gone. I also own a top 40 station, and that's what's going on now. And there was a term I heard somewhere along the line called psychosclerosis, hardening of the mind. And usually people get it socially in their late 20s. They get married, they have children, they go like this because all of a sudden they have no energy for anything else. You're bringing up children, you don't want to get all excited, you want to turn off. And it changes you. So you become, remember the good old days. And why were they good old days? They weren't any better than these days. These are the good old days. It depends on what you do with your life. I've got to really move along because I could be here for hours talking like this.
We'll let you.
I have two uncles who were ministers who would just get up and do that all day on Sunday. So, Weston High School, I was in the announcers club when I was a freshman and a sophomore, and then I was too busy for it. I built a radio station in my bedroom, which my friend Evan Karakostas down the street could drive around the neighborhood at 14 or 15 in his parents' car when they weren't there and listen to. And then a high school classmate of mine named John Reisner, who passed away about 10 years ago. This is full of a lot of dead people, by the way. He and I made a record called the World News Roundup, which was a rough take on the old Buchanan and Goodman series, if you remember that. Martians are landing, blah, 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 blah. We took it into Arnie Ginsberg at WBOS on Com Ave. And he said, okay, come back tonight and we'll put it on the air. And we did. And he played it. And the next day we got a call from him saying, we just heard from Roulette Records, they're going to issue a cease and desist. We can't play it anymore. So that's when I learned about the rules.
That was a novelty record, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a novelty. So then in high school, I was a senior, and I'm getting the typical parental pressure to go to college. And in my life, I always felt clumsy because there were things I could never figure out. And to me, everything had to make sense. I don't know about you, but sometimes we accept things as the way they are, and then we learn later they aren't that way. Well, I was always like, well, this doesn't make any sense. What am I going to get out of college? Oh, well, you've got to go to college or you won't be successful. You have to have a diploma, no one will hire you. I said, well, in the radio business, what do they need a diploma? You're either good or you're not. And I was thinking as a performer of being a disc jockey. So the deal I made with my parents was, all right, I'll try it. So I applied 3 places: Emerson College, broadcasting, University of Miami, broadcasting, and Harvard. I don't know why I applied to Harvard. My mother wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. What did I want to do? I had no interest in it. Why should I do that? I should do what I like to do. And my father, in his usual sour way, because he's half Scottish, his mother was very dour, Where does the disc jockey go? What happens there? You know, what do they want with a kid like you? 10 years later, I hired him. So, graduated high school, off to the University of Miami, loved radio. Oh, but while I was a senior, I thought, what am I waiting for? I'm 17. I just turned 17. No, I turned 18 in December of 1959. And I thought, I should go get a job in radio and try. So I put together a tape of me reading commercials and introducing songs and so forth, and made a bunch of copies on tape, which you did back then, and drove around to every radio station within 50 miles of where I lived. Went into Boston, all the Boston stations. I remember going to WHDH on Gallivan Boulevard, and met John Day, who was the program director of, you know, and he looked at me like, here's this kid. And, you know, they still had a guy on the morning show playing the organ. What was the guy's name? If you're old enough to remember that. So I ended up on a rainy morning, the second day, I took 2 days off from school and walked into this little radio station in the Opera House building in Milford. And the station had just changed their call letters to WMRC from WMOO. Moo. And everybody called it Moo. I'm listening to Moo. And apparently the guy who was doing the weekend show was somewhat of a drunk. And by 3 or 4 in the afternoon on Saturday or Sunday, you could tell. So he hired me. He said, well, can you read the news? I said, yeah. He said, well, go in the studio, he said, because he was doing the midday show while I was there. Read the news. When I give you the signal, just read these stories. So I did. He said, okay, we'll pay you $1 an hour. We'll give you an extra $1 to prepare your show, and you'll be on from 1 to 6 every Saturday and Sunday. I didn't dare tell anybody except my girlfriend at the time. She lived in Dedham, and she could get it by taking a clock radio and holding it at an angle to the screen in the window. Anyway, to zip the story right along, because I have to kick myself to move. I tend to get too detailed. By March or April, I got a phone call from a station in Worcester, WORC. I had never heard of this station. I grew up listening to Boston radio, which I thought was pretty good. I mean, there were great personalities on, entertainment, morning shows, Woo-Woo Ginsburg. And when I was doing my tour of handing out the tapes and do you have any openings, I came out of WTAG, which was owned by the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, this big, imposing granite building right on Franklin Street in downtown Worcester. WAAB, which used to be in Boston but had to move because the FCC separated stations, and WNEB. And so I'm in the phone book and I look and I said, this WORC radio station. Everybody else had bold type or an ad. They didn't even have that, just a little line. I thought, what's WORC? So I'm up and down the dial, and all of a sudden there's this station that's twice as loud as anything else on the dial. Seriously, it was like, whoa. Because, you know, put the radio on, everything's the same, except boom. And it was a show called Open House Party, which was hosted by the owner of the station, a guy named Bob Breyer, and another guy named Dick Smith, who from Northborough. And so I thought, oh, I'll go to this station. And I couldn't believe what I heard. This station was the most amazing, living, breathing radio station. It was like something going on all the time. It was exciting and fun and full of energy in addition to the music. But they didn't talk that much. It wasn't like blah, 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 blah. It was like, well, blah, 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 blah. I ended up getting hired to work weekends there, and summer vacation, when people took a vacation, I'd fill in. Then in the fall, I was off to the University of Miami for majoring in broadcasting for my deal with my parents. And I was there, and I'm going to my classes and this and that, and my broadcasting class, which was the one I was really interested in, was like something out of 1949. They're teaching radio drama. I mean, sound effects. Are you kidding me? This is gone. So that was irrelevant. You know, physics, English literature, this is the 13th grade. Why am I wasting my life here? And to this day, I believe for most people, college is a total waste of time and money. And we've gotten this societal thing where you'll fail if you don't go to college. If you want to be a lawyer, you've got to go to college and learn the law and get a degree. If you want to be a doctor, you have to learn medicine. But if you want to be a business person, well, Harvard Business School is pretty good. You can walk out and make 150 grand to start. But for your average person doing an average job, except for something to separate you from somebody else, it becomes a waste of time, I think. So, aside from my opinions. So at the end of my first semester, I decided, this is stupid. I can be 3.5 years ahead of everybody else my age who's entering the field if I start now, not in 3.5 more years. So I packed my car. I planned to leave at 4 in the morning from Coral Gables, which is south of Miami, because I wanted to get through the Miami traffic, and said goodbye to all the people in the dorm and the building and people I could see, and I went to bed around 8 o'clock thinking I'd fall asleep. Well, then the knock, 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 hey, don't say goodbye. People kept coming in to say goodbye. I went, this isn't going to work. I just got up, hopped in the car, and off I went in my 1954 Buick Special, pulled into my parents' driveway at 27 Ledgewood Road in Weston. What are you doing here? Oh, I'm taking some time off. That's another great slogan, right? We've all heard that. Looking for a job, I had 2 offers, one from WMEX in Boston and one from WORC. WMEX wanted me to do news. I had no interest in that. WORC would let me do, I was production manager during the week, which means you produce the commercials. And then I do a disc jockey shift on Saturday night, which is what I ended up doing on a national radio show for 30 years. So from there, I ended up Newsline at WPTR in Albany. We're popping over a bunch of get fired, quit, get fired, quit. And WPTR was a 50,000 watt AM station, high on the dial, which made it like a big shortwave station. We got letters all the time from people in England and Europe. We came in nightly in Montreal, Quebec, the Maritime provinces, all over New England. At 10 o'clock in Boston, before, how did they work? Arnie was still on, but there was no music in Boston. I'm trying to remember how this worked.
Jerry
64.
Williams was on after 10, right?
After 10, yeah. So, because Arnie had gone to WMEX, he was on from 8 to 10. So there was no top 40 music in Boston. So we had tons of listeners in Boston. And I was on from 9 to midnight, which was great. And I ended up with the highest ratings on the station. I had a 50 share. The rest of the station had like an 18 share, which was damn good. But there was no FM then. Today, a station's lucky to have a 7 because you have so much diversity. And with the streaming stuff coming in and your car radio suddenly not being a radio anymore, it's going to be an audio thing. It's going to be even smaller slices. But I was there, and it was a very successful radio station. The Beatles came out while I was there, which just blew everything up. But I felt constrained because the kind of radio I was doing was the kind of radio that I learned at WORC and the kind of radio that I appreciated in Boston, because Boston had personalities, and Arnie Ginsberg and all the Joe Smith, and there were other people too. Dave Maynard, a guy named Dick Biondi, who used to be on a station in Buffalo, which you could listen to at night in Weston. So the problem was that this station was tightly formatted. Out of every song, you had to start with the call letters. WPTR, time, you had to give the time. Every other song, you had to give the weather. You had to, it was like this list of things, these little index cards, you had a slogan to read. And it was like, my hands tied behind. How do you entertain people and make them love you and love your radio station if all you're doing is hammering over the head with digital bullshit? I hated it. I hated the restriction. I hated getting called on. Well, listen, you didn't mention the time here, and it's like, you don't get it. You don't understand what people are looking for on the radio. All you're doing is all you do is care about what the station wants, not what the listeners want. And what the station really wants is big audiences. So that was what spawned WGTR. I was 21, 22 years old. I said, the only way I'm going to be able to do the kind of radio that I believe in is to be the program director. And then I thought, no, the general manager is going to insist, and then they're going to bring a consultant in, and they're all going to want the same nonsense because they just don't get it. And I can give you a beautiful illustration of that today. That's where radio is now. It's returned to that. iHeartRadio has destroyed personality in almost all the markets outside the top 10. The top 10, they still have some semblance of it. Cumulus, CBS Radio, which is now a part of a group called Entercom. If you listen to music radio, it is really hard to find any great entertainment because they don't encourage it. They train you to be a trained dog and just read the liner cards, or there are no cards, it's on a screen, and just hammer the station's message, download our app, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? You've told me that 50 times today. You think tomorrow I don't remember it? It's just brainless. So I thought the only way I can really get control is to own my own radio station. So I was not motivated by money. I was not motivated by anything else but a desire to do great radio entertainment. So I built my own stage. When I was 17 at the University of Miami, I had I thought to myself, I should get my first class FCC license, which is a commercial license that enables you to work on transmitters and television and all this stuff. And I had all the knowledge. I studied it when I was a kid. Well, I was still a kid, I guess. So I went down to the FCC office in Miami and took element 3 and 4 and 2, and which is the elements. There were 4 elements to getting your first class, which doesn't exist anymore. They dumbed it down, so there's no more element 4, which was the highest sophistication of electronic engineering. And I took that in Boston, and I got my license. So I had the knowledge, but I didn't know how allocations worked. Well, there was a guy named Russ David who was the chief engineer of WPTR, and he used to be the national sales manager of GE Broadcast Division. And he was an engineer, and I said, so I peppered him constantly, well, what do I do, da-da-da. And I got a copy of the FCC rules, which is part 73 of the federal regulations. And they went everywhere with me, into the bathroom, reading them. Just and I learned how it worked. So I thought to myself, so I did the engineering, and I thought, where am I going to put the station? I want to put a station in the Boston area, the area I grew up in and born in, loved. And so I found there were a few frequencies that might have worked. And the way that the FCC works, if you want a station, you've got to show through an engineering exhibit that your proposal will not interfere with any other existing station by very strict standards. And so I found that 1070 might work, but 1060 would work. And even though it was close to WBZ, which is protected out about 8 or 10 miles to one of their coverage contours, it would still work quite well. You wouldn't be able to get nighttime because of a station in Philadelphia called KYW, owned by Westinghouse at the time. So I put the application together, did the engineering. At the same time, I thought, I've got to be in Boston because one of the requirements is you have to show that you can build a station financially and run it for 3 months with no income. And that's a pretty loose standard. I mean, 3 months, you need more than that. But that's what they wanted. So I had to find money. So I thought, I've got to be in Boston. So I started making contact with the Chamber of Boston Chamber of Commerce, or Mass Chamber of Commerce. And at the same time, I called a guy who used to work at WORC named Mel Miller, who was program director of WMEX. I thought I'd like to work at WMEX. I grew up listening to it, loved the station. And he said, actually, he said, we do have an opening, but I don't think you'd want it as the overnight show. I said, I'll take it. He said, well, okay, send me a tape. I've heard your work. You sound great. He said, send me a tape and I'll play it for Mac Richmond, who owns the station. Called me back. I was hired. Moved to Boston. Chamber of Commerce said, oh, let's see, where are we going to get you some money? They said, so it's got to be somebody who's a little eccentric and somebody who believes in things. So they sent me to the Framingham Chamber of Commerce. Framingham Chamber of Commerce said, same thing. We have some, oh, perfect, Norman Farley. So, there I am at WMEX. And, oh, that's too soon. Wait a minute, this should be there. Well, no, we're out of order here. There we go. Anybody recognize that?
Meadows, yeah.
That's the Meadows, right next to Walmart, which used to be Caldor. Norman Farley bought that from the estate of Vaughn Monroe, a big singer back in the 40s and 50s, for $250,000. 10 years later, he sold, with 28 acres. 10 years later, he sold 10 acres to Caldor, if you remember that, for $660,000. Norman Farley Sr. owned Farley's Diner in Framingham Center, right at Trolley Square, before they put the underpass in. And he was a character, shoot on a cigar. He'd sit in the diner. He'd look up the whole top of the diner. It was, you know, this thing hanging down with a mirror on it. He could sit and watch every table and make sure the waitress charged $1.29 for the tapioca pudding and, you know, didn't give it away free. So Norman said that he was interested and he'd be the money. Then I get a phone call from him one day. Come on, I got to meet with you. I go, geez. So I go out and meet with him. He said, I got a phone call from Billy Sullivan, and his group is looking at this. Billy Sullivan owned the Patriots. He said, I don't think I want to do it. I'm too old. I'm 61. No Farley man has lived past 62. Those were the days, huh? Everybody eating steak every day. But he said, you might talk to my son, Norman Jr. So I met Norman Farley Jr. He came up. He said, yes. So we worked out a deal where he would put up all the money. He would get 2/3 of the company, and I'd get 1/3. And that's when I learned the golden rule. The guy with the gold makes the rules. So we put together the application, or we filed it, off to the FCC, and everything was great until May 5th, 1965, when the FCC assigned what's called a cutoff date. Back in those days, if you filed an application for a station, the FCC would examine it, make sure it's acceptable for filing, meets all the rules, and they'd put a date, and after that date, no one could file a competing application. And you have to advertise it in a place that people read, the newspaper. They're just now at the FCC considering eliminating that you have to publish things in the newspaper. Welcome to 2019. So on that day, the last day, in came another application for 1060 from a company called Natick Broadcast Associates. I went, who's this? And I went, oh, and they're going for, only one person's going to get the license. But it's worse than that, because they don't just flip a coin. You've got to go down and go to a comparative hearing, where the hearing examiner listens to everybody and you present the evidence and who's got the best qualifications and who's the most local and all these things. And it meant a lot of money. Fortunately, oh, I left a part out. I got a call from Norman Farley after this application went in. He said, oh, John, I can't afford this. I'm going to have to pull out. Well, there goes my money, and if I can't replace it, there goes the application because we don't meet the financial qualification. So fortunately, I should have made notes of what these pictures are for. There I am again. Hi, how are you? Well, there we go. There's, let's stay there. Well, let's go to here. Oh, no. I know why I'm out of order. I've left something out. So this is May 5th, 1965. In the fall, or I think the fall or spring, I get this thing from the FCC. It's an order dismissing the application of Natick Broadcast Associates. They threw them out. So I'm reading the thing. The problem was their engineer, we had proposed a tower 140 feet high. And obviously the higher you go, the farther the signal goes to a point. They proposed a tower 450 feet high. And they interfered with KYW in Philadelphia. And the FCC had just adopted what they called go, no-go rules. You either meet it or you don't. There's no, well, come back later. Oh, I'll let you. It was like, you don't meet it, you're gone. So we're thrilled. So we go ahead and, I said, who's we? Well, fortunately, I had through my brother-in-law, Jack Carlson, who ran a company in Cochituate called Carlson Corporation. They're big contractors, and they were around for years till they went bankrupt because they were doing business in Saudi Arabia and they didn't pay their bills. And he introduced me to his lawyer, which was a guy from Wellesley named James Langan. And Langan was the old-time Boston Mafia and a character. He was also a special justice. And in those days, you could be a judge, part-time, and a lawyer. They don't allow it anymore. So he said, well, this is worth something. He said, you know, if everybody could have a racetrack, everybody would. It's guaranteed income. So he proposed, he said, Jack should put some money in, I'll put money in, and your dad can put some money in, my father. And so that's what happened. And they gave me, I ended up with like 60-70% of the company, but 30% of it was in a trust, which they voted on. They said, well, once things get going, we want to make sure you don't go crazy, and okay. Which came back to bite me later, if I have time. Where are we? I'm not moving fast enough. So we built the station. We built the transmitter. I had to find a transmitter site, and so I'm looking for land where I could do this. Fortunately, Natick at that time in the zoning had a provision that there was no height restriction for a tower or for a public service corporation. And that was another thing I had to learn. I had to learn local zoning, which came in later when I had to build a 1,400-foot tower up in Hudson for my TV station. And there were only two places left you could put it, Shrewsbury and Hudson, that had no height restriction. But Natick didn't. So I found this piece of land in South Natick at 1 Speen Street, and was owned by a guy named Williams. I forget his first name, Jim Williams. Older guy, lovely wife. They're chicken farmers. They raised chickens. And you drive into their property, and the house was here. As you go in now, there's a subdivision there. And then you go farther in, and all these chicken coops. And I really learned to love chickens. They're so funny. It's like, no offense to women here, but they're like a bunch of old hens. They're like, that's why they call them old, you know, they're always talking. And then they start picking on one of them. They're really funny. Unfortunately, some of them get pecked to death, but some husbands do too. So they were going to lease us 5 acres of land to put the tower on. And so we built the tower. That's the base of it that we poured, the base insulator, and the tower. And then we had to bury 120 copper radials that went out 200 feet from in each direction, which is, you know, miles of number 10 copper wire, which isn't cheap. And these days, it's really not cheap. We built a building, we got the transmitter, and then we get another notice. These Natick Broadcast Associates had gone off to the U.S. Court of Appeals. And they said they're being treated harshly, where this isn't really a serious offense, and it's curable, and like judges do, they, well, who is the guy in the Bible who, all right, we'll give some to you and we'll give some to you. And Langan said something I'll never forget. He said, the nature of a decision is somebody's happy and somebody's unhappy. So all of a sudden there was a stay on us putting the radio station on the air. So there we are stuck facing a hearing. And I'll spare you the next few years. We ended up in Washington, D.C. And that's my father, who had come down for moral support and also to give a dignified image, because there was this young kid, me, and against this other group. The other group, by the way, was headed by a guy named Ed Perry, who lived at 80 Pond Street. And his partners were Skip Boucher, son of the weatherman, if you're all old enough to remember Roland Boucher, WKOX, a guy named Bill Miller, who was a writer at Channel 5, and 4 other guys. Stanley and Sumner Feldberg, the president and treasurer of Zaire, Newell Curson, who owned a bunch of movie theaters, and Richard Smith, who also, he was chairman of General Cinema Corporation, which owned hundreds of movie theaters. These people had all the money in the world, and here we are, these poor little folk. In the meantime, I'd bought a house in Natick. I moved to Natick at 251 Oak Street because I wanted to be a resident of the town. I wanted to get the vibe of the town. I wanted to have, Natick on my address, so the FCC looks, they say, oh, he knows what's Weston? That's too far away. So we went to the FCC hearings, and the other people had done some personal attacks on me with these affidavits. And I'm not going to get into the detail of it because that's another whole long story, and we don't have time. But the bottom line was, at the end, we were awarded the license, and the Natick Broadcast Associates was disqualified because the affidavits proved to be false. And you can't do that. They had one of their members, I'd left out the jewel of the group, an attorney from Natick named Leon Fox, who had who had obtained these false affidavits. And we had to bring witnesses who gave the affidavits, who he talked into signing them, to Washington to testify, no, that's not what we said. And that was that. So we have the license. It's now 1971. Let's go. And so back we went, we got that thing going, and we had to find a place to put the radio station for the studios. So I'm looking around for real estate, and I found this beautiful old captain's mansion at 24 West Central Street that was for sale for $45,000. Beautiful, beautiful building. I thought, this is perfect. How can we afford it? We don't have a budget for that. We had $50,000 was our total cash budget to do all this stuff. So I sold my house that I'd bought at 251 Oak Street for $12,500 in 1966. And I sold it for $23,500 in 1972. There was the money. So we bought this building at 24 West Central Street. I moved into the attic, the 3rd floor. And on the air we went on November 5th or something, 1972. And the station was instantly successful. It took off like a rocket. We were very lucky because I'd found some really incredible people to run the station and do the work. I mean, I was running the station, but they were running their departments. And those of you who listen, there I am in my office looking like, the king of Russia. One of the things we recognized was, here we are with this little 1,000-watt station that covers Metro West. And how are we going to compete with these massive Boston radio stations? WVBF was just coming in. WRKO is the big station. WBZ, WHDH, WEEI. How are we going to compete with these stations for listeners? Because it's home movies or Hollywood. You've got to have quality or people won't listen. They don't care how local it is. So I figured out, well, what assets do we have? Well, my assets are I'm a wonderful air personality. I can be on the air. And I found a program director. In the meantime, right before this, I was consulting the night stations, which is WSRS, WHEB, WGIR Manchester, Fall River. And there was a program director in Portsmouth who was from Wellesley named Don Kelley. Don was like 23, 24 years old, but a real radio fanatic in programming. He could tell you who won the two Mustangs from WRKO in 1969. He still can. He'll tell you what you had for lunch on July. He's like autistic, but he's not autistic. He has an incredible memory for stuff and very talented. So the deal was going to be, and he was a disc jockey too. So I thought, well, why don't we, I just got to the radio conventions, but they had some very primitive computers that would sequence events. They would start a tape recorder, they would start a cartridge machine, and I thought, well, why can't we have something where we can set it up that we would have the disc jockey on a talk tape, record the talk part of the show, and introduce the songs, and we figured out how to do it. I had a brilliant engineer named Bob Lund. He's dead too. Died at 43 of a massive heart attack. In fact, most of the people there are passed away. I think Don Kelley, myself, of the original crew are the only ones left. Only the good die young. So we got this thing working, and I bought all those machines for $10,000 from the ABC radio network in New York. It used to be part of their WABC FM station, which was called Love FM. And we loaded it into a U-Haul truck and drove it back here and put it all together. And the machine by itself on the top and the middle, that was the talk tape. And on the left are oldie categories and commercials and all that. On the right is the remote control that ran the transmitter. The one with the 3 meters is an RDC 10AC. The engineers here will appreciate that I remember that.
Can I ask you one question, John?
Yes.
Your father, of course, became business manager for the station. But tell us the story about his time at the transmitter site.
Yeah, he wanted me to. So when you first put a station, well, one of the conditions of our license was we had to take measurements on the signal in the direction of Philadelphia to prove that we were not interfering with KYW. And the way you do that is you put your station on the air and you go out with a field intensity meter that's accurately calibrated. It's a big heavy thing with old-fashioned lead-acid batteries in it, and you go out and you find a place away from power lines and things, and you go out on these radials, and the measuring point is every whatever it is, and sometimes in people's backyards, and you go into their backyard, and so we had to do that. So we had a couple. I was doing it. Bob Lund was doing it. But somebody also legally had to do the station identification, which by law, by FCC rule, had to be done on the top and bottom of the hour within 5 minutes of the hour. So who's going to do that? And somebody has to sit there, because there had to be a licensed operator on duty. Well, my father, he had just retired from being vice president of a furniture chain called John H. Prey & Sons. They had a store at Natick Mall in downtown Boston, South Shore Plaza. And the company had gone bankrupt. So he had nothing to do. I said, hey, you mind doing this? Whoa, what do I have to do? I said, well, we had a little thing called a Shure mixer. So I said, on the top of the hour, just turn it up and say WGTR, Natick, and then turn it back down, then another half hour. You know, bring a book, papers, whatever you want to do. So we'd start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he had this gruff voice with a semi-Boston accent. WGTR, Natick. He'd turn it down. And everybody in the family would turn it on to hear him because it was hysterical. So that was the automation system we called Leo. And The company that made the device that drove it was a company called Schaefer Electronics. Behind, the woman there is Roseanne Pawelek, by the way. She's from Ashland. She was one of our news people. She ended up at WBZ. She was lovely, very bright and excellent news person. And Schaefer Electronics, you know, their system had been used for stations that would play beautiful music. So-called Madhavani, you know, dee, dee, dee. This is soft and easy, blah, blah, blah. The next song would start. It was very simple. Well, we got it to do things that were like, we're talking up songs and we're doing, you know, what's called production, like, you know, WGTR, boom, like over the beginning of a song, all that stuff, which nobody had ever done before. We had people flying in from all over the country they wouldn't believe it was an automated station, because Schaefer would bring them in. They didn't, you know, they had to demo it. That's Don Kelley with somebody who thinks he's hysterical. Where is that? I don't know where that is. Now, the other guy we found was Jim McAllister. Jim was news director, and he was unbelievable. Another one who passed away, young, 47, 48 years old. Years after this, I heard him on a station in Lowell. I was driving along, listening to stations, looking for someone to do news, because one of the most essential things that we had to do was not just have great entertainment, but have the community. There's nowhere else you can turn on the radio and find out, well, KOX, but you know, we had to be plugged into Natick, Framingham, you know, Metro West. So I heard Jim's voice. He sounded like Edward R. Murrow. He had this great delivery. And the work ethic was unbelievable. He was living in Nashua, New Hampshire when he worked in Lowell at the station WCAP. And he started commuting. He'd leave home at 4 in the morning, except on Tuesday, because Monday night he'd go to the selectmen's meeting. He set up a cot in the kitchen of the radio station and sleep there, and then get up and he'd have the fresh report. And then in the beginning, because we couldn't afford a second news person with our initial budget, he did the news all day. He'd stay there all day. I said, Jim, why don't you record? Oh, no, something happens. We have to, you know, okay. He was just unbelievable. And then we had the trading post. Does anybody remember that? 9 to 10 in the morning. And that was people buying and selling stuff. And we formatted it in a way where the show moved along and it had music in it. And a lot of people in radio didn't understand. The reason we were doing it is not because we wanted to sell things. It was we wanted to entertain people. And the phone calls were funny, and that's what we always tried to do with them. We'd you know, make the show entertaining. You just hear a couple of quick calls and then back to more music. And the show was a big success. That was the mobile studio we had. It was a little camper trailer. I was going by, a year later of living in the attic, I finally could afford to buy a house. I bought a house on Lake Fort Meadow in Marlboro. And I was going by Marlboro Datsun, which is now Marlboro Nissan. And that thing was sitting out there. I thought, boy, that'd be a nice little thing to broadcast from. So I talked them into selling it to us in exchange for advertising, what in radio we call a trade deal, little barter. Then we had the record-breaking fun summer of '78, where we worked this promotion out with Natick Mall, where we broadcast for a week, and every day it was different contests and games to set new Guinness World Records and get in the record book. And that was hugely, the place was mobbed every single day. We broadcast everything from there. There's another, that was Craig Howard. He was our marketing director. He did a phenomenal job. He ended up going to work later for Pepsi-Cola Bottling Company of Natick. Another one who passed away, 43, 44 years old. We hired him. He's just gotten out of the service, back from Vietnam. He was a Green Beret medic, and that's a tough job. And he had all the Agent Orange symptoms. He had the pockmarks, couldn't have children, he had the mood swings, but he was just a great guy, and I'm very sad when he passed. That's interviewing Debbie Boone. We had a bunch of songs that we ended up making national hits from this little dinky radio station in Natick, and You Light Up My Life, that was one of them. We were the first radio station to broadcast the Boston Marathon. It's been running since 1895, but oh yeah, the marathon's tomorrow. Why don't we do something? So we just open the window, and here they come. There they go. Anybody who can name 2 runners will win a prize. And then one year, good old Jim McAllister just announced that he thought it would be a great idea for him. They don't allow vehicles in the marathon route because they don't want carbon monoxide hitting the runners. They have one truck, and all the photographers and everything get on that. So Jim said, how about if we put our two-way radio on a bicycle? So Jim rode a bicycle the length of the marathon, and it was so there we are at 24 West Central Street. I think I went in to get a cup of coffee or something, and there's Jim. In about 1978, we also decided it was time to computerize the front end of our automation system, which until then we had to make our logs up that had which song was playing and where you talked on paper, and we had a woman who would just fill it out by hand every single day. If an advertising order came in, it went into, I'm trying to think, they'd buy 20 commercials, you made these little strips, you'd type them on this electric, and you'd put them in this thing, and you put them on the big Xerox machine that took up half the room and smelled funny. And, well, we said, why don't we computerize this? So we bought this fantastic new DEC computer called the VT78. It was magical. It had 16K of memory, total. 8K was the operating system, the other 8K was what you worked with. It had 4 big 8-inch floppies that were the noise, ka-kung, 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 ka-chung, ka-chung. And the programs you wrote had to have these little tiny modules that would load, run something, write it to a file, load the next module. It was torture, but it worked. And we had this company come in and program it, and it was hooked up to upstairs, so they'd get all the orders would be in. It would put the commercials in the right place. It would put the music in the right place, the talk things, blah, blah, blah. It would print a log, and then you'd hit another magical key, and it would send it digitally up to the second floor at 110 baud into the Schaefer computer. No radio station had anything like this, and they wouldn't have it until 20 years later. It wasn't until the 2000s that Boston radio stations started automating with, well, not reel-to-reel. They had, by that time, you could put music on disc and play it back digitally, which didn't really happen until the 90s. And I remember when we pioneered that too from another company I had. And I remember buying a 1.2 gigabyte hard drive. It was this big, cost $3,000, 1.2 gigabyte, weighed 5 pounds. There's my father on the left in his office, which used to be mine, but I moved up to the attic. And if you remember Wendy, the champagne lady on the right, she used to be a character we put on the air, and she was just a character. She was 6 feet tall, and she was albino, so she had white hair and pink eyes and big. And when she came at you, it was like, if you didn't know her, it was like, who is this? And she also, like, rah, 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 rah. She was very, you know. So then, so while this is all going on, I got bored. I said, okay, what else can we do? This is running fine. Let's screw it up. What we really want is to be 50,000 watts, so we cover all of Boston and go 24 hours a day. So sometime in the mid-70s, we started trying to figure out how to do this. We spoke to 2 or 3 Washington consulting engineers who all told us that, well, you know, you might get 5,000 watts, that you probably won't get nighttime and blah, blah, blah. Until we hit a guy named Carl E. Smith. Carl was in his 80s at the time. He was the guy who wrote the formulas the FCC uses now, to this day, to calculate directional antennas and how they work. Well, and away he went. We ended up with a 50,000 watt daytime power application and 5,000 at night. Unfortunately, Westinghouse Broadcasting felt very threatened. We were on the frequency of their Philadelphia station, which at night they were fearful we'd come in on top of them. But more so, they were afraid of us being right next to WBZ, their flagship in Boston. We were 1060, they were 1030, and our 25 millivolt contours, was how they measured it back then, were kissing. And, well, they really weren't kissing. So they filed a petition to deny, and here we go again. We ended up reaching a compromise, which they didn't like, but the FCC bought, cut the power to 2,500 a night, 25,000 daytime, which in effect was negligible, 1.2 dB or something. And then we built it. So off we go. We had to find a transmitter site. Oh, I'm already beyond help. We ended up, we tried in Southborough. We have this beautiful site, which I'd gotten under agreement to buy for $150,000, which was 70 acres. It turned out it was 90 acres because we did a survey. And all the neighbors came running in, objecting, oh, well, we're going to cook like a microwave oven, and our children are going to climb them and fall off, and all the NIMBY stuff. So we ended up in Ashland. And those 5 towers you see down off 126 as you go up the hill toward Fafford's development, those are the towers we built. And they work great. And this is us building them. We used the mobile unit, which is an old Avis airport van for a carry-all. Those are the tower sections. There's the transmitter building. We had to clear 40 acres of land. We got approved easily, and I'd hire a great lawyer in Framingham, John, what was his name? He said, what you have to do is on a Saturday morning, go around to every neighbor, tell them what you want to do and ask for their help. And just explain to them exactly what it is, show them a picture, and then tell them, if you don't do this, it's industrial land, and you'll end up with factories and big trucks and noise, and this is going to sit there, and the birds are going to fly around, and it's a much nicer thing to have next to your house than a factory. And the neighbors all came in, and they all spoke in favor. It was great. So on the air we went, and we thought, what are we going to do for, we were a top 40 station in Metro West and Natick. But by now it's 1979. Radio's changing. FM is coming in. Music is going to FM, and I could clearly see that all music would be on FM in a short time. But the one hole in the radio format market in here and in Boston was every top 10 city in America had 2 all-news stations. Boston only had a 1/2 news station. WEEI 590, you couldn't get out here. And meanwhile, these rich people in Wellesley and Weston who work in the stocks and blah, blah, they listen to it religiously. So he said, that's the format to do. It's unfortunately the most expensive format to do, but we figured a way to do it using automation. So we became the news G1060, and we bought billboards. But if you look at the logo, unfortunately, when you put the billboard up, it didn't say radio. We thought AM would be enough. People thought it was Globo. They thought, oh, the Boston Globe must be doing something. What is it? I don't know what it is. They thought it was the Boston Globe. So the station was starting to work, but unfortunately, we were running out of money. So to make a whole long story short, my partners who said, oh yeah, once you get the place running, we'll turn over the trust stock to you, they never did. And my brother-in-law decided he was going to put his son, who'd never run anything except a restaurant that failed in California, in La Jolla, in charge, and put me up in the attic like a crazy uncle, which I was. So while up there, I started thinking of things to do, and we had previously filed for an FM license on the island of Nantucket, which had been granted. And we'd filed for a television license for Channel 66, licensed originally to Worcester, or allocated to Worcester, but we got to move to Marlborough, which is Middlesex County, which made it a Boston station. So off I went to work on that, and that's what we did. And the next thing was 1985, we put Channel 66 on the air. That's Arnie Ginsberg on the left. He was my business partner. I called him, Arnie, I said, I'll give you 10% of this thing if you'll help me out. Oh, well, So along he came, and he brought with him, wisdom, knowledge, and credibility, and connections. And we raised $10 million and built Channel 66. Sold it 2 years later to Home Shopping Network for twice that. So, and all the investors were very happy. So that's it.